Detective Morgan Hayes stared in disbelief at the bloody German shepherd dragging a duffel bag through the mud. Rain pelted down mercilessly as the dog's legs trembled with each excruciating step. When Morgan unzipped the bag, her world collapsed. Inside were 3 newborn puppies, barely breathing, nestled against a blood-stained police vest. What kind of monster would force a wounded K-9 officer to flee for her life with newborns in tow? And why was the name Shadow embroidered on a vest from a precinct 200 miles away? If you've ever wondered how far loyalty can stretch before it breaks, or what sacrifice truly means in its rawest form, this story will haunt you long after the final word. Subscribe to K9 Code Red for more incredible tales of canine heroism that will forever change how you see the bond between humans and their 4-legged partners. Chapter 1: The Discovery. The rain had been falling for hours over Pine Ridge County, transforming dirt roads into muddy rivers and turning the normally peaceful countryside into a dreary, waterlogged landscape. Detective Morgan Hayes, 38, was finishing her evening patrol along Old Sawmill Road, a desolate stretch that separated farmland from the denser woods at the edge of town. Her windshield wipers struggled against the downpour as she contemplated heading back to the station. Morgan loved these quiet patrols. After 15 years in Chicago PD's Homicide Division, the calm of rural law enforcement had been her salvation. No more sleepless nights haunted by crime scene photos, no more political battles with superiors who cared more about clearance rates than justice. Here in Pine Ridge, population 8,742, she could breathe again. Most days anyway. She was about to radio in when something caught her eye, a dark shape moving slowly along the muddy shoulder. Morgan slowed her cruiser, squinting through the rain-streaked glass. At first she thought it might be a coyote, or perhaps a lost dog, but as her headlights illuminated the figure, her heart stuttered. It was a German shepherd, soaking wet and dangerously thin. Its coat was matted with mud, and what looked disturbingly like blood. But what made Morgan's breath catch was what the dog was doing, methodically dragging a navy blue duffel bag through the mud, gripping the strap between powerful jaws. "What the hell?" Morgan whispered, pulling her cruiser to the side and grabbing her flashlight. The moment her car door opened, the dog froze. The shepherd turned its head slowly, eyes reflecting the cruiser's headlights with an eerie, amber glow. Morgan had worked with K9 units before. She recognized the alertness, the intelligence in those eyes. This wasn't just any stray. "Hey there," Morgan called softly, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. "It's okay." The dog didn't run, didn't bark. Instead, it did something that sent a chill down Morgan's spine. It deliberately dropped the bag's strap and took 2 painful steps backward, as if offering the bag to her. Morgan approached cautiously, rain soaking through her uniform jacket. The dog watched her intently, ears forward, despite its obvious exhaustion. Now that she was closer, Morgan could see the dog was female, her belly slightly swollen, evidence of recent motherhood. A deep gash ran along her side, crusted with dried blood and dirt, but it was her eyes that stopped Morgan cold, dark, knowing, and filled with a desperation that transcended species. "What have you got there, girl?" Morgan murmured, crouching beside the duffel bag. The zipper was partially open. Morgan pulled it wider, shining her flashlight inside. What she saw made her physically recoil. 3 tiny puppies, eyes still sealed shut, huddled together in a nest made from what appeared to be a torn K9 unit vest. Their tiny bodies trembled from cold, one letting out a pitiful squeak that was nearly lost in the sound of rainfall. And beneath them, soaked with rainwater and what looked horrifyingly like blood, was a police vest with a name patch, Shadow. "Oh my God," Morgan gasped, looking up at the German shepherd, who stood watching, swaying slightly from exhaustion. The dog, Shadow, presumably, whined softly, taking a tentative step toward the bag. She nudged the smallest puppy with her nose, then looked back at Morgan with an expression that needed no translation. "Help us." Morgan didn't hesitate. She shed her jacket and gently wrapped the puppies inside, cradling them against her chest. Then she turned to Shadow. "Come on, girl, let's get you out of this rain." For a heartbeat, the dog remained motionless, as if weighing her options. Then with painful slowness, she limped toward Morgan's cruiser, leaving bloody paw prints in the mud. What Morgan couldn't know as she helped the wounded shepherd into her back seat was that this wasn't a simple case of animal abuse. The vest wasn't stolen merchandise or a coincidence. It was a clue, one that would lead her into a darkness that had followed her from Chicago, a corruption that had tentacles reaching all the way to Pine Ridge County. And Shadow wasn't just running away from something. She was running toward justice. Chapter 2, Broken Trust. The Pine Ridge Veterinary Clinic was technically closed when Morgan's cruiser pulled into the parking lot, but the lights were still on. Dr. Elena Vasquez, L to her friends, was working late again. Morgan had never been more grateful for her friend's workaholic tendencies. Morgan radioed dispatch as she parked. "This is Detective Hayes. I found an injured canine, possibly police-trained, with 3 newborn puppies, bringing them to Dr. Vasquez at Pine Ridge Vet. The dog has identification indicating the name Shadow. Run that through the system. See if any departments have reported a missing canine unit." "Copy that, Detective," came the response. "Do you need backup?" Morgan glanced at the shepherd in her rear-view mirror. Shadow lay curled protectively around the jacket containing her puppies, eyes half closed with exhaustion but still watchful. "Negative, just information for now, and tell Chief Reeves I'll file a full report in the morning." Morgan carefully gathered the bundled puppies in one arm and opened the rear door, speaking softly to Shadow. "Easy girl, we're getting you help." To her surprise, the dog needed no coaxing. Despite her injuries, Shadow followed Morgan diligently, limping but determined, as if she understood exactly where they were going. Elle looked up from her computer as the clinic door chimed. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and faint shadows under her eyes spoke of too many long nights. The moment she saw Morgan, uniform-soaked, cradling a bundle, with a bleeding German shepherd at her heels, she was on her feet. "Exam room 2, she directed, already grabbing gloves and a surgical kit. Under the bright lights of the exam room, the full extent of Shadow's condition became heartbreakingly clear. The dog's ribs protruded sharply through her dull coat. The wound along her side was deep, jagged, and showing signs of infection. Her paws were raw and bleeding, caked with mud and gravel. "God, Morgan," Elle whispered as she gently examined the dog. "This isn't neglect, this is deliberate cruelty." Morgan nodded grimly, carefully placing the bundled puppies on a warming pad Elle had prepared. "Check her for a microchip. Was wearing a canine unit vest. Name patch, says Shadow." Elle ran the scanner over Shadow's shoulder blades. After a moment, it beeped. "Got one." She read the information on the screen, her expression darkening. "She's registered to the Lancaster County Sheriff's Department. That's over 200 miles from here." Morgan frowned. "Lancaster? That doesn't make sense. What would a police dog from Lancaster be doing all the way out here, in this condition?" Elle continued her examination, moving carefully, as Shadow watched her every move. When she parted the fur around Shadow's neck, she froze. "Morgan, look at this." Beneath the matted fur was a collar, embedded so deeply it had nearly disappeared into the skin. Elle carefully cut it away, revealing raw, infected flesh underneath, and something else. A crude brand, burned into the skin, RF. "That's not standard canine identification," Morgan said, her stomach churning. "That's ownership." Elle's eyes flashed with anger. "No department would do this. No legitimate one," Morgan agreed. As Elle began treating Shadow's wounds, administering fluids and antibiotics, Morgan checked on the puppies. They were tiny, probably no more than a week old. 2 males and a female, all with the same black and tan markings as their mother. The smallest, one of the males, wasn't moving much. "Elle," Morgan called, her voice tight. "This one's barely breathing." Elle quickly examined the puppy, her movements precise despite her evident fatigue. "Hypothermia, probably dehydration too." She prepared a tiny syringe of glucose solution. "Hold him steady." Morgan cradled the puppy, noticing how perfectly he fit in her palm. So fragile, so completely dependent. From the examination table, Shadow whined softly, struggling to lift her head. "It's okay," Morgan told her. "We've got him." As Elle worked, Morgan's phone rang. It was dispatch. "Detective Hayes, we've got something strange. According to the system, Canine Officer Shadow from Lancaster County Sheriff's Department was reported deceased 8 months ago, killed in the line of duty." Morgan looked at the very much alive, if barely, German shepherd on the examination table. "That's impossible," she said. "Unless there's more," dispatch continued. The handler was a deputy, Robert Finch. He was killed in the same incident. Shadow reportedly died trying to protect him. Robert Finch, RF. The brand on Shadow's neck. A chill crawled up Morgan's spine. Either this wasn't Shadow, or someone had gone to great lengths to make it appear a dead canine officer had stayed dead. Elle finished bandaging Shadow's side and looked up at Morgan. "She's stable, but weak. The infection is bad. She must have been dragging those puppies for days." Morgan nodded absently, her mind racing. "The vest in the bag. It's evidence. I need to secure it." Elle gestured to a cabinet. "There are evidence bags in there. Standard procedure for abuse cases." As Morgan carefully removed the torn canine vest from the duffel, something fell from its folds, a small metallic object that clinked against the exam room floor. Morgan crouched to retrieve it. It was a badge, not a canine badge, but a deputy's star, and taped to the back was a small flash drive. Morgan stared at it, then at Shadow, who was watching her through pain-glazed eyes. "You weren't just saving your puppies, were you, girl?" Morgan whispered. "You were delivering a message." Later that night, after Elle had stabilized Shadow and set up a warm, safe space for her and the puppies at the clinic, Morgan sat alone in her cruiser, the flash drive heavy in her hand. Protocol dictated she should turn it in immediately, log it as evidence. But something instinct, honed by years of dealing with departmental corruption in Chicago, held her back. If Shadow had truly been reported dead, if her handler had died under circumstances questionable enough that someone would fake his canine's death too, then who could she trust? Morgan plugged the drive into her laptop. The files were encrypted, but a text document in the root directory wasn't. It contained just 3 lines. "If you're reading this, I'm dead, and Shadow found someone honest. Trust no one with a badge in Lancaster County. RF plus JD plus MK = Project Cerberus." Morgan stared at the screen, a familiar coldness settling in her stomach, the same coldness she'd felt in Chicago when she'd realized how deep the corruption in her precinct ran, the coldness that had eventually driven her to Pine Ridge, seeking escape. But there was no escape. Not really. Not when dogs presumed dead showed up dragging their puppies through the rain, carrying dead men's messages. From the clinic, Morgan could see Shadow through the window, curled protectively around her puppies. The shepherd's eyes were closed now, her breathing steady under the influence of pain medication. Even in sleep, her body was positioned between her vulnerable offspring and the door. Morgan made a decision then, until she knew exactly what Project Cerberus was and why it was worth killing a deputy and trying to kill his canine. Shadow and her puppies would stay with her, protected, hidden. Because whatever Shadow had escaped from, Morgan was certain it wasn't over, not by a long shot. Chapter 3, Whispered Secrets. Dawn broke over Pine Ridge in streaks of pale gold and lavender, but Morgan hadn't slept. She'd spent the night researching Deputy Robert Finch, combing through news articles about his death and what little public information existed about Lancaster County's canine program. The official story was straightforward. Deputy Finch and his canine partner Shadow had been killed during a drug bust gone wrong. They'd pursued a suspect into an abandoned warehouse where Finch was shot. Shadow, attempting to protect her handler, was also killed. The suspect had escaped, but was later identified as Julian Diaz, a mid-level distributor for a cartel operating along the eastern seaboard. Diaz remained at large. It was neat, too neat. Morgan rubbed her eyes and took another sip of coffee that had long since gone cold. Outside her small farmhouse, the countryside was coming alive with morning sounds, birds calling, the distant lowing of cattle from the neighboring farm. It all felt surreal against the weight of what she was uncovering. She'd found 3 articles mentioning unusual circumstances surrounding Finch's death, all from the same reporter at the Lancaster County Gazette, Michelle Kwan. In the last article, dated 7 months ago, Kwan questioned why Finch's body had been cremated before his family could view it, and why Shadow's remains had been disposed of rather than returned to Finch's family, as was customary for fallen canine officers. 2 weeks after that article was published, the byline Michelle Kwan disappeared from the Gazette entirely. RF plus JD plus MK = Project Cerberus, Robert Finch. Julian Diaz, Michelle Kwan. Morgan's phone rang, startling her. It was Elle. "She's awake," Elle said without preamble, "and she's asking for you." "Asking for me? How?" "Just get down here. You need to see this." 20 minutes later, Morgan stood in the recovery room at Pine Ridge Veterinary Clinic, watching in astonishment as Shadow systematically gathered her puppies one by one and placed them at Morgan's feet. "She started doing this about an hour ago," Elle explained, her voice hushed with wonder. "Every time I put the puppies back in the whelping box, she waits until I leave, then brings them to the door. When I let her out of the room, she tries to drag them toward the exit." Shadow looked up at Morgan, then nudged the smallest puppy, the one who had nearly died, closer to her boot. The message couldn't have been clearer if she'd spoken aloud. "Take them, protect them." Morgan crouched down, meeting the shepherd's intense gaze. "You want me to take them home?" Shadow's ears perked forward. She placed one paw on Morgan's knee. Elle shook her head. "I've worked with police dogs before, but this level of communication, this intelligence, it's extraordinary." Morgan gently stroked Shadow's head. She was trained to convey complex information, to understand missions, and right now her mission is keeping these puppies safe. She looked up at Elle. "How soon can she be moved?" Elle frowned. "Morgan, that wound is serious. She needs monitoring, antibiotics." "I know, but I need her somewhere secure. Not visible to the public. I can't explain why yet, but trust issues from Chicago following you?" Elle asked softly. Morgan smiled tightly. "Something like that." Elle sighed. "The infection is responding to antibiotics better than I expected. If, and this is a big if, you can administer her medication, change her bandages, and bring her in immediately, if her condition worsens, then yes, she could recover at your place." "Thank you," Morgan said, relief evident in her voice. Elle crossed her arms. "You're going to tell me what this is really about, right? Eventually." Morgan nodded. "As soon as I figure it out myself." By noon, Morgan had converted her spare bedroom into a recovery space for Shadow and her puppies. She'd created a nest of blankets in the corner, installed a baby gate across the doorway, and stocked up on puppy formula in case Shadow's milk production was affected by her injuries or medications. Shadow had settled in immediately, inspecting every corner of the room before allowing Morgan to place her puppies in the blanket nest. Now she lay curled around them, alert but calm, watching as Morgan unpacked medical supplies on the dresser. "You picked the right person," Morgan told her, organizing syringes and bandages. "I may not be a canine handler, but I've worked enough cases with them to know you're something special." Shadow's tail thumped once against the blankets. Morgan smiled, then sobered. "What happened to you, girl? What happened to your handler? And why did they try to erase you both?" As if in response, Shadow's eyes drifted to Morgan's laptop, which sat open on the bed. The flash drive was still plugged into it. Morgan followed her gaze. "Yeah, I'm working on that. Encryption's tough though." She sat on the edge of the bed and resumed her attempts to access the protected files. After several failed approaches, she decided to try the names from the text file as password possibilities. Nothing worked until she entered Cerberus, the three-headed dog of Greek mythology, guardian of the underworld. The files unlocked. What Morgan found made her blood run cold. Documents, photographs, and video files detailing what appeared to be an unofficial canine training operation within Lancaster County Sheriff's Department, but not standard police training. The documents outlined a program using extreme methods to create enhanced assets, dogs trained not just to apprehend suspects or detect contraband, but to kill on command. Dogs whose training violated every ethical standard of canine programs, and it went deeper. Financial records showed payments from private military contractors, requisition forms for drugs not used in standard canine training, autopsy reports on dogs that had failed the program. Shadow had been part of it. Her training records were there, showing exceptional aptitude but resistance to terminal commands. She had been scheduled for decommissioning just days before Finch's death. Buried in the documentation was evidence that Deputy Finch had discovered the program and begun gathering evidence against his superiors. He'd been working with reporter Michelle Kwan, feeding her information while he compiled enough evidence to take to federal authorities. The last file was a video, dated the day of Finch's death. It showed a warehouse interior. Finch's voice was audible off camera. Shadow, record. Stay hidden. The footage was from a camera mounted on Shadow's vest. She had remained concealed behind crates while Finch met with someone, a man in an expensive suit. They argued. Finch accused the man of using the sheriff's department to create assassination dogs for private contractors. The man laughed, told Finch he was naive. Then gunshots. Shadow's camera jolted as she ran toward Finch, who lay bleeding on the concrete floor. A figure stood over him, not the man in the suit, but a uniformed deputy. The deputy turned, aimed at Shadow, fired. The camera tumbled, went dark. Morgan sat frozen, the implications washing over her. Finch hadn't been killed by a drug dealer. He'd been assassinated by his own department. And Shadow had somehow survived, escaped, and eventually given birth while in hiding. And now they were both in Pine Ridge. Morgan closed the laptop and looked at Shadow, who watched her steadily, unflinching. "They think you're dead," Morgan said softly. "But if they find out you're not, if they realize you have this evidence," Shadow's ears flattened against her head. Morgan nodded grimly. "Yeah, they'll come for you. For the puppies. For me, if I help you," the smallest puppy squeaked, wiggling against his mother's belly. Shadow bent to lick him, then looked back at Morgan with an intensity that cut through species barriers. In that moment, it didn't matter that Shadow couldn't speak. Her eyes said everything. "They already took my handler. They tried to take me. They will never take my puppies." Morgan thought of Chicago, of the corruption she'd fled, of how running had solved nothing. Sometimes, you had to stand and fight. "All right," she said, reaching for her phone. "I need to make a call. There's someone who might be able to help us decrypt the rest of these files, figure out how high this goes." As she dialed, Morgan didn't know that 20 miles away, in a black SUV, entering Pine Ridge County, a man was studying a grainy security camera image from a gas station at the edge of town. The image showed a police cruiser with a German Shepherd visible in the back seat. The man made a call of his own. "We found her, Pine Ridge County. Local detective has her." A pause. "No, sir. The puppies are with her too." Another pause. "Understood. No witnesses." Chapter 4. Hunters and hunted. Chief Warren Reeves was not a man easily impressed, nor was he given to dramatic reactions. 27 years in law enforcement, 15 of them as Pine Ridge's chief of police, had left him with a perpetual poker face that served him well in everything from budget meetings to standoffs with armed suspects. But as he sat across from Morgan in her farmhouse kitchen, watching Shadow calmly nurse her puppies while Morgan outlined what she'd discovered, that poker face slipped. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, setting down the coffee mug Morgan had given him. "You're telling me Lancaster County is running some kind of, what, dog assassin program?" Morgan nodded grimly. "Project Cerberus. From what I can piece together, it started as a black-budget experiment in creating more effective canine units for high-risk situations. Somewhere along the line, they started taking private contracts." Reeves rubbed his salt and pepper beard, eyes never leaving Shadow. "And her handler found out. Tried to expose it. Got killed for his trouble. But she survived." Reeves's tone was measured, thoughtful, with evidence. Morgan gestured to her laptop. "Most of it's still encrypted, but what I've accessed is damning. The problem is, I don't know how high this goes. Who's involved? The Lancaster County Sheriff, obviously, but beyond that." She shook her head. "Could be state level. Could be federal. Which means we can't just call in the FBI." Reeves sighed heavily. "Damn it, Morgan. When I hired you, I was hoping your big city experience would help with our modest drug problems and occasional break-ins. Not this." Morgan smiled tightly. "Believe me, Chief, when I took this job, I was hoping to never see anything like this again." Shadow suddenly tensed, ears swiveling toward the window. A low growl rumbled in her chest. Morgan and Reeves exchanged glances. Reeves silently drew his service weapon while Morgan moved to the window, carefully pulling back the curtain, just enough to peer outside. A dark SUV was crawling past her farmhouse, moving too slowly for someone simply driving by. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see the occupants. "They found her already," Morgan whispered. "You don't know that," Reeves countered, but his grip on his weapon tightened. Shadow was fully alert now, positioning herself between her puppies and the window. Her hackles were raised, but she made no sound beyond that initial growl, A trained response. Morgan realized. Silent alertness. The SUV continued down the road, disappearing around a bend. Could be nothing, Reeves said, holstering his weapon. Could be real estate agents. They've been circling properties around here like vultures since that resort development was announced. But Morgan knew better. So did Shadow. They'll be back, she said quietly. And next time, they won't just drive by. Reeves studied her face. What do you want to do? Morgan crouched beside Shadow, gently stroking the dog's head. Shadow leaned into her touch, tension still evident in every muscle. We need to get these files decrypted, figure out exactly who we're dealing with. And we need a safe house, somewhere off the grid, where Shadow and her puppies can stay while we work. Reeves nodded slowly. I might know a place. Old hunting cabin owned by my brother-in-law. No electricity, but it's isolated. As for the decryption, he paused. There's someone who might help. Former NSA analyst. Retired out here about 5 years ago. Keeps to himself, but he owes me a favor. Can you trust him? More than most. Reeves stood. Pack what you need, for yourself and them. I'll make the arrangements. As Reeves left to make his calls, Morgan quickly gathered supplies. Food, water, medical equipment for Shadow, formula for the puppies in case of emergency. She packed the flash drive and her laptop, then hesitated, looking at her service weapon. Standard procedure would be to check it back to the department if she was going off duty. But this wasn't standard procedure. This was survival. She holstered the weapon, then went to retrieve Shadow's duffel bag from where she'd stored it as evidence. The bag itself might be useful, and having something with Shadow's handler's scent might comfort her. As Morgan pulled it from the closet, something caught her eye, a slight bulge in the lining that she hadn't noticed before. She carefully tore the fabric and found a small waterproof case. Inside was a phone, sealed in a plastic bag with a handwritten note. Asterisk emergency only. One call, then destroy. Asterisk. RF asterisk. Morgan stared at it, understanding dawning. Finch had planned for every contingency, including the possibility that Shadow might escape without him. The phone was a lifeline, a final one, but who was on the other end? Before she could consider it further, her own phone rang. It was Reeves. Change of plans, he said, his voice tight. My guy spotted that SUV parked outside the station. 2 men in suits, asking questions about a missing canine. They're showing badges, USMS, U.S. Marshals Service, federal agents. This just got a lot bigger. Morgan said, it gets worse. They've got your name, your address. They're saying you interfered in a federal investigation by taking evidence, the dog. Morgan's mind raced. They can't just, they can, and they are. I'm stalling them, but you need to move. Now, don't go to the cabin. They'll expect that. I'll find you. The line went dead. Morgan turned to Shadow, who was already gathering her puppies, gently picking them up one by one and placing them near the duffel bag, as if understanding they needed to leave. Smart girl, Morgan murmured, helping her place the puppies in a padded carrier she'd bought that morning. As she worked, Morgan's training kicked in. Assess threats, identify resources, establish priorities. Threats, unknown number of operatives from a program with potentially federal backing. Resources, 1 wounded but highly trained canine, her 3 vulnerable puppies, limited supplies, a mysterious emergency phone, and her own police training. Priorities, keep Shadow and her puppies alive. Decrypt the evidence, expose Project Cerberus. It wasn't much, but it was a start. 20 minutes later, Morgan's pickup truck bounced down a back road that cut through dense forest. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, alert despite her injuries, while the puppies slept in their carrier, secured on the floor. Morgan had disabled her phone's GPS and removed the battery for good measure. She'd withdrawn $500 from an ATM, not enough to live on for long, but enough for immediate needs, and she'd chosen a direction opposite from where anyone would expect her to go. Not toward isolation, toward population, toward anonymity. They were headed for Haven City, a mid-sized town about 70 miles east, big enough to disappear in, but small enough to navigate easily. Morgan had worked a joint task force case there years ago, and still knew people who might help, people outside law enforcement. As they crested a hill, Morgan glanced at Shadow. You know what we're doing, don't you? You've been running for months. Shadow's ears twitched at the sound of Morgan's voice, but her gaze remained fixed on the road ahead. Your handler taught you well, Morgan continued. He made sure you'd know what to do if something happened to him. Made sure you could find someone to trust. At the mention of her handler, Shadow finally turned to look at Morgan. There was something in those amber eyes, not just intelligence, but grief, raw and human-like in its intensity. Morgan swallowed hard. I won't let them get you, or your puppies, I promise. She reached out, placing her hand on Shadow's head. The shepherd leaned into her touch, and for a brief moment, the connection between them transcended words, transcended species. They were both hunters by training, both loyal to a fault, and now both hunted. As they drove toward an uncertain sanctuary, the sun began to set behind them, casting long shadows across the road. Somewhere in those shadows, Morgan knew, men were following, men who had already killed once to protect their secret, and wouldn't hesitate to kill again. The question wasn't if they would find them. The question was whether Morgan and Shadow would be ready when they did. Chapter 5. Bonds forged in Fire Haven City emerged from the twilight like a constellation, a grid of lights nestled in the valley between rolling forested hills. Morgan drove past the welcome sign, with its faded promise of being a perfect place to call home, her eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror for signs of pursuit. She'd taken a circuitous route navigating through back roads, doubling back occasionally, and even driving through a shallow creek bed for half a mile. Old counter-surveillance techniques from her undercover days in Chicago. Whether they'd work against federal resources remained to be seen. Beside her, Shadow had remained vigilant throughout the journey, occasionally whining softly when Morgan took particularly sharp turns that disturbed her puppies. The smallest one, whom Morgan had started mentally calling Milo, seemed especially fragile, his tiny body barely bigger than Morgan's palm. Almost there, Morgan murmured, as much to herself as to Shadow. There was a modest house in a working-class neighborhood on Haven City's east side. It belonged to Sadie Chen, a former ER nurse who now ran a small no-kill animal shelter. Morgan had met her during a case involving abused fighting dogs. If anyone would understand the need to protect Shadow and her puppies, it would be Sadie. Morgan parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, carrying the puppy carrier, while Shadow limped beside her, refusing to be separated from her offspring. The evening air was cool, filled with the normal sounds of suburban life, distant laughter, a lawnmower puttering in someone's backyard, the hollow thunk of a basketball hitting concrete. Ordinary life. It felt surreal after what Morgan had discovered. Sadie answered the door on the second knock, her expression shifting from confusion to recognition to concern in the span of seconds. "Morgan Hayes," she said, eyes darting to Shadow and the carrier. "Either this is a very strange coincidence, or you're in some kind of trouble." "The latter," Morgan admitted. "Can we come in?" "I wouldn't ask if," Sadie was already stepping aside. "Get in here before my neighbors start asking questions." Inside, Sadie's home was exactly as Morgan remembered it, organized chaos. Dog beds in every corner, cat toys scattered across shelves, and the faint but not unpleasant smell of animal life. Family photos covered one wall, showcasing Sadie's large extended family alongside pictures of animals she'd rescued over the years. "You can put them in the spare room," Sadie said, leading the way down a short hallway. "It's where I keep the special cases." The room was small but clean, with a thick rug covering most of the floor, and a twin bed pushed against one wall. A stack of folded blankets sat on a chair in the corner. Morgan carefully set down the puppy carrier and opened it. Shadow immediately went to work, checking each puppy with gentle nudges of her nose, before allowing Morgan to create a nest from the blankets. Sadie watched, arms crossed. "Police dog," Morgan nodded. "K9 unit, her name's Shadow." "And why are you showing up at my door with her instead of taking her to, I don't know, actual police?" Morgan met her gaze steadily. "Because someone in law enforcement wants her dead." Sadie didn't flinch, figured it was something like that. "You have that same look you had during the fighting dog case. Like you've seen too much," she sighed. "Kitchen." coffee, explanation. In that order. 10 minutes later, they sat at Sadie's kitchen table, steaming mugs between them. Morgan outlined the situation in broad strokes, finding Shadow, discovering the evidence, realizing federal agents were involved. Jesus, Sadie muttered when Morgan finished. And you think they followed you here? Morgan shook her head. I did everything I could to lose any tail. But these aren't amateurs. I need to get the rest of the evidence decrypted, figure out exactly who we're dealing with, and I need a safe place for Shadow and the puppies while I do it. Sadie took a long sip of her coffee. You can stay here tonight. I've got contacts, people who foster animals off the books when necessary. We can move them tomorrow. Thank you, Morgan said, relief evident in her voice. There's one more thing. She pulled out the emergency phone she'd found in the duffel bag. This belonged to Shadow's handler. It's for one call according to his note. Sadie raised an eyebrow. To who? That's the question. Could be a Fed, could be a journalist, could be another cop. No way to know until we call. And if it's someone involved in this Cerberus thing, Morgan set the phone on the table, then we've just given away our location. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the decision hanging between them. Finally, Sadie stood. Get some rest, both of you. We'll figure it out in the morning. Morgan slept fitfully on a cot beside Shadow's nest, waking at every sound. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft padding of Sadie's cat across the hallway floor, the occasional whimper from one of the puppies. Shadow slept lightly too, her ears twitching at each noise, her body positioned between her puppies and the door. Around 3 a.m., Morgan gave up on sleep entirely. She sat cross-legged on the floor, next to Shadow, laptop open, working through more of the encrypted files. Most were still inaccessible, but she managed to extract fragments, enough to piece together more of the picture. Project Cerberus wasn't just about creating more aggressive canine units. It was about control. The dogs were being implanted with some kind of device, something that could trigger specific behaviors remotely. The ultimate weapon, an assassin that could be deployed, activated, and then disavowed. Perfect deniability, Morgan murmured. A killing that looks like an animal attack. Shadow shifted, laying her head on Morgan's knee. Her amber eyes reflected the dim light of the laptop screen, unnervingly aware. Did they put something in you? Morgan whispered, gently examining the back of Shadow's neck. There was a small healed scar there, partially hidden by fur. Is that why they want you back so badly? Shadow didn't move, didn't react. But somehow, Morgan knew. The dog understood. Dawn was breaking when Sadie shuffled into the room, 2 mugs of fresh coffee in hand. Find anything? She asked, handing one to Morgan. Pieces. Morgan rubbed her eyes. But enough to know this goes beyond just a corrupt sheriff's department. There are private military contractors involved, maybe even intelligence agencies, people with resources. Sadie settled onto the edge of the cot. Well, my contact can take Shadow and the puppies this afternoon. Place about 40 miles north. Remote farm. Owner's a veteran, paranoid as hell, but trustworthy. Morgan nodded gratefully, then froze as her gaze caught something outside the window, a glint of metal in the early morning light. A car parked half a block down, one that hadn't been there the night before. We need to move, she said quietly. Now. Sadie followed her gaze. Could be nothing, could be a neighbor. We can't take that chance. Morgan was already gathering her things, while Shadow, sensing the shift in energy, began corralling her puppies. They were halfway to the kitchen when the front door splintered open. Federal agents. Nobody move. 2 men in tactical gear burst through the entrance, weapons raised. Behind them came a third figure, a man in an expensive suit, silver hair perfectly groomed, his expression calm and cold. Detective Hayes, he said smoothly. I believe you have something that belongs to us. Morgan positioned herself in front of Shadow and the puppies. I don't know what you're talking about. The man smiled thinly. The dog detective. Canine unit Shadow. Federal property, involved in a classified operation. You're interfering in matters beyond your jurisdiction. Shadow growled low in her throat, the sound vibrating through the floor. Federal property, Sadie interjected. That property is a wounded animal with newborn puppies. The man ignored her, eyes fixed on Morgan. Step aside, detective. This doesn't have to be difficult. Morgan didn't move. Show me a warrant. We don't need one. National security exception. He gestured to his men. Take the animal and her litter. Secure any electronic devices. As one of the agents stepped forward, Shadow's growl deepened, her body tensing. Morgan recognized the shift in posture. Shadow was preparing to attack, to protect her puppies at all costs. Wait, Morgan said quickly. You don't understand what you're dealing with. The suited man raised an eyebrow. I think I understand perfectly, detective. You found evidence of a classified program. You think you've uncovered some kind of conspiracy. But what you've actually done is compromise years of work and millions in taxpayer funding. Is that what you call branding dogs, surgically implanting control devices, creating assassination weapons that can't be traced back to their handler? Morgan's voice was steady, even as adrenaline coursed through her veins. Tell me, does the public know their tax dollars are funding Project Cerberus? The man's expression flickered, just a millisecond of surprise before his mask of control returned. You're out of your depth, detective. Am I? Because I've spent all night going through Deputy Finch's files. I know about the private contracts, the field tests that left civilians dead, the cover-ups. Morgan took a step forward. How many people need to die to protect your program, Director Kellerman? It was a shot in the dark. The name had appeared in fragments of the decrypted files, but without context. But the man's slight flinch told Morgan she'd hit the mark. Kellerman's voice hardened. That information is classified. You're now in possession of state secrets, which makes you subject to prosecution, imprisonment, or will I have an unfortunate accident like Robert Finch? Morgan held his gaze. It's too late. I've already sent copies of everything to multiple secure locations. If anything happens to me, to Shadow, to anyone involved, it all goes public. It was a bluff. The files were still largely encrypted, and she hadn't had time to create backups. But it was the only card she had left to play. For a long moment, the room was silent, except for Shadow's continuous growl. Then Kellerman smiled, not the practiced, diplomatic smile he'd worn earlier, but something darker, more genuine. You think you're protecting her, saving her, but you have no idea what she is. He looked at Shadow with something like pride. Show her Asset 4. Execute Protocol 7. Morgan didn't understand at first. Then she felt Shadow go completely still beside her. The growling stopped. Shadow's body straightened, her muscles tensing in a way that seemed unnatural, mechanical. Shadow, Morgan said softly. The German Shepherd didn't respond. Her eyes had changed. The awareness, the intelligence that had been so evident before, had vanished. In its place was something vacant, something programmed. What have you done to her? Morgan whispered. Given her purpose, Kellerman replied. Asset 4, target acquisition. Hayes, Morgan. Shadow's head swiveled toward Morgan, eyes locked on her face. She took one step forward, then another, movements precise and predatory. She won't recognize you now, Kellerman said calmly. Won't remember you helped her. Won't remember her puppies. She'll only obey her programming. And right now, that programming is telling her to eliminate the threat. You. Morgan didn't back away, couldn't. Behind Shadow, the puppies were beginning to whimper, sensing something wrong with their mother. You don't have to do this, Morgan said, not to Kellerman, but to Shadow. This isn't you. This isn't what Finch trained you for. Shadow continued her advance, jaws parting to reveal sharp teeth. It's fascinating, really, Kellerman continued. Even with the implant, she resisted the kill commands. Finch had somehow trained her to fight the programming. That's why he had to be eliminated. He was compromising the asset. Morgan kept her eyes on Shadow, speaking softly, continuously. Remember who you are. Remember Finch. Remember your puppies. Shadow was inches away now. Morgan could feel her breath. It won't work, Kellerman said. The neural implant overrides. He stopped suddenly as Shadow froze, her body trembling with what appeared to be an internal struggle. Behind her, Milo, the smallest puppy, had crawled from the carrier and was wobbling toward his mother, letting out high-pitched squeaks of distress. Something flickered in Shadow's eyes, a moment of recognition, of awareness breaking through the programming. That's it, Morgan encouraged. Fight it, Shadow. Finch taught you how. You can break through. Shadow whined, her body shuddering as though in pain. The implant was fighting to maintain control, but something stronger was emerging. The instinct to protect, not destroy. the core of what made Shadow not just an asset, but a living being with loyalties that transcended programming. Kellerman must have realized what was happening. Assets 1 and 2, restrain the animal. Now, the two agents moved forward, but Shadow was faster. With a snarl that seemed to come from somewhere primal, she spun and launched herself at the closest agent, teeth closing around his wrist. The man screamed, his weapon clattering to the floor. In the chaos that followed, Morgan acted on instinct. She dove for the fallen gun, rolled, and came up with it trained on Kellerman. "Call them off," she ordered. Now, Kellerman's calm facade had finally cracked. "You have no idea what forces you're messing with, detective." "Maybe not," Morgan replied, "but I know enough to bring you down." From the doorway, a new voice entered the confrontation. "So do I." Morgan glanced over to see Chief Reeves standing there, his service weapon drawn. Behind him were 3 uniformed officers, and most surprisingly, a woman in a dark suit with an FBI badge visible on her belt. "Director Kellerman," the FBI agent said crisply, "you're being detained pending an investigation into unauthorized operations conducted under Project Cerberus." Kellerman's face drained of color. "On whose authority?" "Mine," the woman replied. "Special Agent Michelle Kwan, FBI Internal Oversight Division." Morgan nearly dropped her weapon in shock. "MK." The reporter wasn't just a journalist, she was deep cover FBI, investigating corruption from within. As the Pine Ridge officers moved to secure Kellerman and his agents, Shadow retreated to her puppies, gathering them close, her body still trembling from the effort of overcoming the implant's control. Reeves approached Morgan, holstering his weapon. "Turns out your encrypted files weren't so encrypted after all. My NSA friend cracked them in about 2 hours. We've been tracking you since you left town, keeping our distance, making sure you weren't followed. But they found us anyway," Morgan said. "We let them," Agent Kwan interjected, stepping closer. "We needed Kellerman to show his hand, to demonstrate the control mechanism in action. It was the final piece we needed to shut down Project Cerberus completely." Morgan looked at Shadow, who was curled protectively around her puppies, the vacant look completely gone from her eyes. "You used us as bait. We protected you," Reeves countered. "Had officers in position the whole time, but we needed him to incriminate himself." Morgan wanted to be angry, but exhaustion was overtaking adrenaline. What mattered was that Shadow and her puppies were safe, that Kellerman was in custody, that the truth would come out. Agent Kwan knelt beside Shadow, her expression softening. "We've been looking for her since Finch died. He was my informant, feeding me information about Cerberus from the inside. When he was killed, we thought Shadow had been eliminated too. She escaped," Morgan said, "survived long enough to have her puppies, protected them at all costs." Kwan nodded. "We'll need to remove the implant. Our techs have been studying the technology. It's dangerous, but she should recover fully." "And then what happens to her?" Morgan asked, the question heavy in her chest. "Protocol would dictate she be taken to a federal facility, evaluated, possibly retired from service," Kwan replied. Then more softly, "But I think Finch would have wanted her to have a real home, a second chance." Morgan met Shadow's gaze, feeling that same connection that had formed the moment she found her on that rainy road. Understanding, trust, a bond forged through danger and protection. "I think I know just the place," she said. Chapter 6. The way home. 3 months passed like a dream and a lifetime. Summer faded into autumn, painting the hills around Morgan's farmhouse in shades of gold and crimson. The morning air carried a crisp edge now, promising winter in the not-too-distant future. But inside, warmth prevailed. Morgan sat on her porch swing, coffee mug in hand, watching as Shadow romped through the fallen leaves with her puppies, no longer tiny helpless creatures, but gangly, energetic young dogs exploring the world with boundless enthusiasm. The smallest one, Milo, still lagged behind his siblings in size, but what he lacked in stature he made up for in determination, a trait he'd inherited from his mother. He wobbled over to Morgan now, leaves stuck to his fur, and placed his head on her knee with a sigh of contentment. "Tired already?" Morgan scratched behind his ears, smiling as his eyes drooped with pleasure. From the yard, Shadow watched them, her posture relaxed but alert, always alert. Some habits could never be unlearned, not even after months of peace and healing. The scar on her neck, where the implant had been removed, was barely visible now, hidden beneath a healthy coat that shone in the morning sunlight. Her ribs no longer protruded, and the wound on her side had healed into a faint line that only showed when she stretched in certain ways. But the physical changes were nothing compared to the transformation in her spirit. Day by day, Shadow had shed the rigid military precision of her training, allowing a more playful, curious nature to emerge. She still responded to commands with impressive discipline, but now she also sprawled on the couch during movie nights, stole socks from the laundry basket, and occasionally howled along when Morgan played her old jazz records. She was becoming not just a survivor, not just a protector, but a companion. Morgan's phone buzzed with a text from Chief Reeves. Nutper Kellerman's plea deal finalized. 25 years, no parole, full disclosure on Cerberus operations. You were right about everything. Morgan smiled grimly. Justice had come at a high cost. Deputy Finch would never see it, but it had come. Project Cerberus had been dismantled, its facilities shuttered, its files made public in a congressional hearing that had shocked the nation. 14 other dogs with neural implants had been recovered and were undergoing rehabilitation. Agent Kwan, now heading the FBI's newly formed Oversight Committee on Canine Programs, had visited last week, bringing paperwork that officially transferred Shadow's ownership to Morgan. She's not just a retired police dog anymore, Kwan had explained. She's a symbol of everything that went wrong with the program, and everything that can go right when we remember these animals are partners, not tools. Another text came through, this one from L. Appointments for the puppy's final checkup tomorrow at 2. Still sure about your decision? Morgan glanced at Milo, now snoring softly against her leg, then at the other puppies tumbling over each other in the yard. Her decision to keep Milo while finding homes for his siblings hadn't been easy, but it felt right. The two larger puppies, now named Scout and Luna, had been adopted by families who understood their special background and needs. They would begin training next month as therapy dogs, working with veterans suffering from PTSD, a fitting legacy for their mother's courage and their father's sacrifice. As if sensing Morgan's thoughts, Shadow trotted over, leaving her other puppies to their play. She sat beside the swing, leaning against Morgan's leg in a gesture that had become familiar. Not quite submission, not quite dominance, but partnership. What do you think, girl? Morgan asked softly. Did we do right by them? Shadow looked up, those intelligent amber eyes meeting Morgan's with an understanding that transcended words. Then she rested her head on Morgan's knee, alongside her son's. The answer was clear. Later that evening, as twilight painted the sky in watercolor hues, Morgan watched from the kitchen window as Shadow led her puppies in what had become a nightly ritual, a patrol of the property's perimeter. She moved with purpose, stopping at certain points to allow the puppies to sniff and explore, but always guiding them back to the route, teaching them awareness, caution, protection. Some instincts remained, coded into blood and bone, but now those instincts served life, not death. The sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Morgan wasn't surprised to see Sadie's pickup truck coming up the drive. Since that fateful morning in Haven City, Sadie had become a frequent visitor and a close friend. Brought dinner, Sadie announced, holding up bags of takeout as she stepped onto the porch. And news. They settled at the kitchen table while Shadow and the puppies continued their patrol outside. Over containers of Thai food, Sadie shared what she'd learned from her contacts in the animal rescue community. Remember those other dogs from Lancaster County, the ones in the cages? She asked, twirling noodles around her fork. Morgan nodded. She'd thought often of those animals, the ones they'd found behind the barn that day. The last one got adopted yesterday, a family in Oregon. They're calling him Phoenix, rising from the ashes and all that. That's good, Morgan said, feeling a weight lift that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. Another loose end tied, another wrong made right. Sadie leaned forward, her expression growing serious. There's something else. I got a call from a shelter in Idaho. They found another German Shepherd last week. Male, about 5 years old, with a brand. Morgan's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Like shadows, similar, different letters. And get this, he has a healed incision in the same spot on his neck. They did a scan, found traces of metal, like something had been implanted and removed. Another Cerberus dog. Morgan breathed. One that escaped, or was released, Sadie countered. Either way, they're asking if we can take him, given our experience. Through the window, Morgan could see Shadow gathering her puppies, herding them back toward the house as darkness fell. She'd done this every night since coming to live with Morgan, bringing her family to safety before the night creatures emerged. When? Morgan asked. They can transport him next week. He's still anxious, reactive. Might take months of rehabilitation. Morgan nodded slowly. Tell them yes. Sadie smiled, relief evident in her expression. I was hoping you'd say that. As they cleared away the dinner containers, Morgan's phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but she answered anyway. Detective Hayes, this is Thomas Finch, Robert's brother. Morgan stepped onto the porch for privacy, heart racing. She'd spoken with Finch's family during the investigation, but hadn't kept in touch after the case closed. Mr. Finch, she acknowledged. What can I do for you? There was a pause, the sound of a throat clearing. I wanted to thank you for what you did for Shadow, for bringing the truth to light. It was Shadow who did the hard part. Morgan replied honestly. She's the one who found me, who protected the evidence your brother gathered. Another pause. That's actually why I'm calling. We've been going through Rob's things. Found something I think you should have. What is it? His journal. Started the day Shadow was assigned to him as a puppy. Goes right up to, he didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. There's stuff in there about her training, her commands, things only Rob knew. Things that might help you with her. Morgan watched as Shadow emerged from the darkness, leading her puppies to the porch steps. Even in the dim light, those amber eyes found Morgan's, checking that all was well. I'd like that, Morgan said softly. I think she would too. I'll send it tomorrow. Thomas Finch's voice wavered slightly. The last entry, he knew he might not make it, wrote that if anything happened to him, he hoped Shadow would find someone worthy of her loyalty. Sounds like she did. After the call ended, Morgan sat on the porch steps, surrounded by Shadow and her puppies. The night was clear, stars emerging one by one in the velvet sky. The air smelled of autumn leaves and distant wood smoke. Shadow settled beside her, a warm, solid presence against the growing chill. The puppies sprawled around them, already half asleep after their evening patrol. Your first handler would be proud of you, Morgan told Shadow, scratching the spot behind her ears that always made her lean in closer. Proud of how you survived, how you saved your puppies, how you never forgot who you really were, even when they tried to turn you into something else. Shadow's tail thumped against the wooden steps, once, twice, 3 times. Not an answer exactly, but an acknowledgement, a connection spanning the gulf between species, between past and present, between what was lost and what had been found. In the quiet of the evening, with Shadow warm against her side and the puppies sleeping peacefully, Morgan felt something she hadn't experienced since before Chicago, before the corruption and disillusionment that had driven her to Pine Ridge, a sense of purpose, of rightness. This wasn't the life she'd planned, not by a long shot, but watching Shadow, who had endured unimaginable trauma, only to emerge stronger, more compassionate, more herself, Morgan realized it was exactly the life she needed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. A damaged shepherd from Idaho, the final veterinary appointments for the puppies, the continuing aftermath of Project Cerberus as more details emerged in congressional hearings. But tonight, in this moment, there was just Morgan and Shadow and the puppies, a family forged not by blood, but by choice, by rescue, by the unwavering belief that even in the darkest circumstances, loyalty and love could light the way home. As darkness settled completely around them, Shadow raised her head, eyes reflecting the distant star. Then she leaned against Morgan, a sigh of contentment escaping her as she finally, truly, let her guard down. They had both been hunters, both been hunted. Now, together, Together they had found something more valuable than either had dared to hope for. They had found peace. Epilogue: 1 year later, Pine Ridge Police Department made history by establishing its first ever K-9 unit. The ceremonial ribbon cutting drew a crowd that spilled from the municipal building onto the street outside. At center stage stood Chief Reeves, flanked by Morgan, now officially designated as the department's K-9 training officer, and Shadow, wearing a new vest with the Pine Ridge PD insignia gleaming on her shoulder. What these animals offer isn't just heightened senses or specialized skills, Morgan told the assembled crowd and cameras. It's a kind of partnership that transcends language, that reminds us of the best qualities in ourselves: loyalty, courage, and the willingness to protect others at any cost. Shadow sat perfectly still beside her, head high, attention focused forward, the picture of dignity and discipline. Only Morgan noticed the slight wag of her tail, the brightness in those amber eyes that spoke of pride, of joy, in having found her purpose once again. Behind them, in the shade of a maple tree, sat Sadie with Milo, now a handsome young dog in his own right, though still smaller than his mother. Beside them was Rex, the shepherd from Idaho, his transformation from traumatized Cerberus victim to confident companion nothing short of miraculous. And at Sadie's other side, leaning on a cane but standing tall, was Thomas Finch, who had become a regular visitor, bringing stories of his brother and early photographs of Shadow as a puppy. He'd started a foundation in Robert's name, dedicated to ethical training standards for police dogs nationwide. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, a young girl approached Morgan and Shadow, her eyes wide with wonder. "Is she really the hero dog?" she asked. "The one who saved the other puppies?" Morgan smiled. "She is." The girl looked at Shadow with reverence. "She doesn't look scary." "The bravest ones often don't," Morgan replied, nodding permission as the girl cautiously extended her hand for Shadow to sniff. "True courage isn't about being fearless, it's about doing what's right, even when you're afraid." Shadow gentle licked the girl's fingers, then pressed her head against the child's small palm, a gesture of connection, of trust, freely given. As the girl giggled with delight, Morgan caught Sadie's eye across the courtyard. They shared a smile, a silent acknowledgement of how far they'd come, of how many lives had been changed by one shepherd's desperate journey through the rain that night. Shadow's story continued to spread, inspiring changes in K-9 programs across the country. Her puppies, Milo, Scout, and Luna, had become ambassadors in their own right, bridging the gap between police departments and the communities they served, between trained service animals and the humans who needed their unique abilities. But perhaps the most profound change was the quietest one, the healing that had taken place between a wounded detective and a traumatized shepherd, two souls who had found in each other exactly what they needed to become whole again. That evening, as sunset painted the hills around Morgan's farmhouse in hues of amber that matched Shadow's eyes, they sat together on the porch swing. Shadow's head rested in Morgan's lap, while Milo played in the yard with Rex, their barks punctuating the peaceful air. Morgan ran her fingers through Shadow's fur, tracing the outline of scars now hidden beneath, reminders of what they had survived together. "Not bad for a couple of strays," she murmured. Shadow looked up at her with those knowing eyes, then settled back with a contented sigh that seemed to say, "This is where I belong. This is home." And in that moment, watching the sun sink below the horizon, with Shadow warm against her side, Morgan knew with absolute certainty that some bonds could never be broken, not by distance, not by trauma, not even by death. Some loyalties transcended everything. If this story touched you, if it made you think about the unbreakable bond between humans and their canine companions, please subscribe to K9 Code Red for more tales of heroism and heart. Leave a comment sharing what moved you most. Was it Shadow's sacrifice, Morgan's determination, the puppy's journey from vulnerability to strength? Your support helps us give voice to the countless silent heroes in fur coats who serve, protect, and love without condition, asking nothing in return but the chance to be by our side.